All right. I'll get this down.
If you want, I can start.
Whatever you want to do, it's fine with me.
Okay. David and the Holy Bread, chapter 21. David came to Nob to the priest Ahimelech. Ahimelech came trembling to meet David and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" David said to the priest Ahimelech, "The king has charged me with a matter and said to me, 'No one must know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Now then, what have you at hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever is here." The priest answered David, "I have no ordinary bread at hand, only holy bread, provided that the young men have kept themselves from women." David answered the priest, "Indeed, women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy even when it is a common journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there except the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord, to be replaced by hot bread on the day it is taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's shepherds rather. David said to Ahimelech, "Is there no spear or sword here with you? I did not bring my sword or my weapons with me because the king's business required haste." The priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take that, take it, for there is none here except that one." David said, "There is none like it. Give it to me." David rose and fled that day from Saul. He went to King Achish of Gath. The servants of Achish said to him, "Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s." David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of King Achish of Gath. So he changed his behavior before them. He pretended to be mad when in their presence. He scratched marks on the doors of the gate and let his spittle run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, "Look, you see that man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen that you should have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" Do you want to read the next one? Lori?
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Want to read the next one?
Yeah. David left there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and all his father's house heard of it, they went down there to him. Everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him, and he became captain over them. Those who were with him numbered about 400. David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, "Please, let my father and my mother come to you until I know what God will do for me." He left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not remain in the stronghold. Leave and go into the land of Judah." So David left and went into the forest of Hereth. Saul heard that David and those who were with him had been located. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height, with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing around him. Saul said to his servants who stood around him, "Hear now, you Benjaminites, will the son of Jesse give up every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? Is that why all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a league with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait as he is doing today." Doeg, the Edomite, who was in charge of Saul's servants, answered, "I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub. He inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine." The king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and for all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. Saul said, "Listen now, son of Ahitub." And he answered, "Here I am, my lord." Saul said to him, "Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, by giving him bread and a sword, and by inquiring of God for him, so that he has risen up against me, to lie in wait as he is doing today?" Then Ahimelech answered the king, "Who among all your servants is so faithful as David? He is the king's son-in-law, and is quick to do your bidding, and is honored in your house. Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? By no means. Do not let the king impute anything to his servant or to any member of my father's house, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little." The king said, "You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house." The king said to the guard who stood around him, "Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also was with David. They knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me." But the servants of the king would not raise their hand to attack the priests of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, "You, Doeg, turn and attack the priests." Doeg the Edomite turned and attacked the priests. On that day, he killed 85 who wore the linen ephod. Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword. Men and women, children and infants, oxen, donkeys, and sheep, he put to the sword. But one of the sons of Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. David said to Abiathar, "I knew on this day, when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul. I am responsible for the lives of all your father's house. Stay with me, and do not be afraid, for the one who seeks my life seeks your life. You will be safe with me." Do you want to keep going, Sandy?
Sure. Now they told David, "The Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors." David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go and attack these Philistines?" The Lord said to David, "Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah." But David's men said to him, "Look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more than if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines?" Then David inquired of the Lord again. The Lord answered him, "Yes, go down to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand." So David and his men went to Keilah, fought with the Philistines, brought away their livestock, and dealt them a heavy defeat. Thus David rescued the inhabitants of Keilah. When Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, he came down with an ephod in his hand. Now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, and Saul said, "God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars." Saul summoned all the people to war, to go down to Keilah, to besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was plotting evil against him, he said to the priest Abiathar, "Bring the ephod here." David said, "O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. And now, will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, I beseech you, tell your servant." The Lord said, "He will come down." Then David said, "Will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul?" The Lord said, "They will surrender you." Then David and his men, who were about 600, set out and left Keilah. They wandered wherever they could go. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition. David remained in the strongholds of in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but the Lord did not give him into his hand. David was in the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh when he learned that Saul had come out to seek his life. Saul's son Jonathan set out and came to David at Horesh. There he strengthened his hand through the Lord. He said to him, "Do not be afraid, for the hand of my father Saul shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be second to you. My father Saul also knows that this is so." Then the two of them made a covenant before the Lord. David remained at Horesh, and Jonathan went home. Then some Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, "David is hiding among us in the strongholds of Horesh, on the hills of Hachilah, which is south of Jeshimon. Now, O king, whenever you wish to come down, do so, and our part will be to surrender him into the king's hand." Saul said, "May you be blessed by the Lord for showing me compassion. Go and make sure once more. Find out exactly where he is and who has seen him there, for I am told that he is very cunning. Look around and learn all the hiding places where he lurks and come back to me with sure information. Then I will go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah." So they set out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the Arabah to the south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men went to search for him. When David was told, he went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. When Saul heard that, he pursued David into the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. David was hurrying to get away from Saul, while Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them. Then a messenger came to Saul, saying, "Hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid on the land." So Saul stopped pursuing David and went against the Philistines. Therefore, that place was called the Rock of Escape. David then went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi.
I don't know where we're stopping. Do we keep going? Anybody know?
In the email Larry sent yesterday, it said chapters 21 to 24.
Through 24?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, chapter 24. When Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to look for David and his men in the direction of the rocks of the wild goats. He came to the sheepfolds beside the road where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. The men of David said to him, Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, I will give you your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you. Then David went and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. Afterward, David was stricken to the heart because he had cut off a corner of Saul's cloak. He said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to raise my hand against him, for he is the Lord's anointed. So David scolded his men severely and did not permit them to attack Saul. Then Saul got up and left the cave and went on his way. Afterwards, David also rose up and went out of the cave and called after Saul, My lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the ground and did obeisance. David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of those who say, David seeks to do you harm? This very day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you into my hand in the cave, and some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not raise my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. See, my father, see the corner of your cloak in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the corner of your cloak and did not kill you, you may know for certain that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you are hunting me to take my life. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. As the ancient proverb says, out of the wicked comes forth wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you. Against whom has the king of Israel come out? Whom do you pursue? A dead dog? A single flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you. May he see to it and plead my cause and vindicate me against you. When David had finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, Is this your voice, my son David? Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. Today you have explained how you have dealt well with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For who has ever found an enemy and sent the enemy safely away? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. Now I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not wipe out my name from my father's house. So David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. The end of 24. Wow, talk about walking the higher road. Yeah.
I continue. We've talked about this before, but the conversations with God are always so interesting. And
Yeah, he has just meddles.
say that again.
Then it just seems like God meddles. I'm really sure.
You
really
know
sure-
what? There's this woman at Stanford named Lerman, maybe Lurman, something like that. And she has studied evangelicals who learn how to have conversations with God. And
Oh.
in the same way can say, well, God told me to do A, B, C, D, E. You know, and this was obviously a world where people,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that was part of their kind of mental equipment, I guess, to
Mhm.
have these conversations.
But I think
Well, you
it's
know,
interesting
In this
that
case, on military strategy.
Yeah. Well, you know, we've talked at different times, mostly through some of the reflections, I think, about how as you start studying these things and really trying to think about them and reading other writers about that the first century mind was not the same as the 21st century mind.
Yeah.
Not at all. And that we just, it's very hard to put ourselves back there as it would be for them to think of themselves in this world.
Right.
But there's a lot of, there's a lot of sort of, I don't want to call it magical thinking, but there's a sort of an acceptance of a, I don't know, supernatural relationships that are not common to our world, our thinking,
Mhm.
Exactly.
you know, our
Yeah.
brain today, I think.
But I think it was especially interesting that God told David, I'll give him into your hands, and then you do whatever you think is right.
Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
He didn't say, wipe him out, he's your enemy. He just said, well, I'm going to give you the opportunity, then you have to decide.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, that is interesting. And he didn't tell him not to wipe him out either.
No, he didn't.
no, make your own choice. Yeah,
Well, and also a real, which I guess is true, you know, for a long time in many places, this real sense of the power of God's anointed, that he has once been anointed as king. And so he is qualitatively different from other enemies that you might have.
that's an idea that's persisted, you know, among kings,
Sure.
that they are anointed and they are different,
Yeah.
that they have a direct communication.
We're going to
Yeah.
have to work hard for King Charles III, but
But he's going to be anointed.
going to be anointed. The Archbishop will be there.
Yes, the Archbishop should know. I don't know. Yeah,
Peggy, you're muted.
I was gonna say, it's more obvious when it's the end of someone's reign, like Elizabeth, that we can see the way that God worked through her to give her courage in times of whatever. But it's harder to see it when it's happening. Charles might come out. Maybe something will happen that's major that he'll live up to what
Well,
people.
I think that the admiration for Elizabeth, for most people, is not that she was anointed, but her own personal qualities, we explain it in very human and very
Yeah,
personality terms.
her
I
faith.
think.
Yeah, but her
Yeah.
faith.
Yes. And her faith was part of it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she came to the throne as a very young woman,
Yes.
as, the wife and mother who'd led a pretty exemplary
Mhm.
life and felt a duty to maintain that.
Right. Right.
Whereas Charles comes with a lot of baggage.
Yeah.
a lot of baggage. It
Well,
comes with
it's a
the
big
other
diff-
woman.
A big difference between being what was Elizabeth's early 20s
Yeah.
Yeah. and early 70s.
And in some ways, I hadn't thought of this till this minute, but her formative years during World War II clearly
Mhm.
made a difference.
Yeah.
A period of such self-sacrifice, and in which the royal family and her father was so much, who never expected to play that role, was so much a part of commitment to what was perceived as the common good, right? and discipline and sacrifice and all of that
Yeah.
at a very young and formative age for her.
Yeah. But Charles is more our contemporary.
Is he
Yes.
70? Isn't he
I
about?
think so.
3, I think.
So he's
73?
older. Yeah.
Yep.
Got a few years on him, but
But close, closer than to Elizabeth.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting that before this part could happen, or not before it could happen, but before it did happen, that he and Jonathan made yet another pledge to one another.
Yes.
And, you know, that was big because after all, when Saul then says at the end, well, definitely you are the God's anointed and you're going to be the king of Israel. I mean, it could have gone over like a flat pancake with Jonathan if he were a normal, I mean, had more self-interest than,
Mhm.
I think it all worked. It was sort of like this passages we read tonight are sort of the culmination of all these intricate relationships that have had to be formed and reformed. And, I think it's a big part of how this could actually take place is the fact that Jonathan and David had this long period to become friends, to become really confidants, and Jonathan wanted him to be, whereas the alternate thing would be that Jonathan would be the king, he would be the
Yes.
second,
Yes.
and there was never any feeling, at least of what I've heard, that was what Jonathan wanted. Jonathan really wanted David to, the best for him, or wanted his leadership or something, which is kind of amazing for two young men to be able to make a pact that they would look out for each other.
Well, I think Jonathan believed that David was God's chosen,
Yeah.
anointed one, and therefore that meant he was it. And besides his personal feelings of friendship and love with David, he and Saul were both interested in making sure that their family survived this change of rulers, because the normal thing is you usually wipe out all your competitors once you get on
Yeah.
the throne,
Yeah.
even if they're your close relatives.
It's funny, that's kind of what they've done to the spare, to Harry. I hadn't thought about that, but in a certain sense, he's been kind of ostracized because he was willing to,
yeah,
at least that's what it seems like to me,
Yeah.
yeah. Hard to imagine what his life was like ever. Be despair.
Yeah.
It's much easier for us to speculate about Harry and Charles than it is. This is coming back to where you started, Lori. This world, and also the whole military world, is so alien to us. The way warfare was conducted, as much as anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading a book about Waterloo, and the numbers of men that they took into that battle from all the various combatants, and people were excited about going to war. I mean, they wanted to go and get Napoleon, that was the big. But it's hard to imagine that, given how you could very possibly die in war, that, young men kind of charged into it, ready to kind of get glory for themselves.
Yes.
It's
Well, they
very hard to get a hold of that.
they draft them before they're old enough to know that they're mortal.
Oh, they weren't. They didn't have to draft them. They all,
Well, yeah, but I mean, the same pool, the people, when you're a lot of 20-year-olds don't think they're ever going to die.
Yeah.
Won't be me that gets killed. I'll go be a hero.
Yeah, and war has always been a quick step to advancement if you're lucky.
If you're lucky.
Whereas there were a lot of other opportunities.
Right. So I imagine in this world, this biblical world, that, if you didn't have a certain number of sheep or fishing or some other way, that this was you joined Saul's army and went looking for David. And, at least maybe you got some food, and if you were lucky, you wouldn't get killed, but.
And it was so much more a part of the texture of life because in so many societies, war was continuous. They were always fighting. That
Well,
was
yeah, I
the
mean,
endemic condition.
several hundred years, and
Yeah.
where you
Yeah.
just kept fighting.
I think it's interesting too that we're talking about a relatively, I think, small area.
Mhm.
I mean, they keep throwing these weird names at us of
Right.
he went here and then he went there, from the forest to the mountains and what have you, but we're still talking about a relatively contained area in the Middle East. They weren't ranging that far. So these combats were all fairly close together.
Mhm. Mhm.
And probably, I don't imagine there were thousands of men. I mean, there were probably a lot of people there, but I imagine the battles were more like between hundreds and not, I don't know, but this doesn't seem like the area could support thousands of men on each side, is what I'm saying.
Mhm.
It's
More like-
logistical.
More like raids and skirmishes.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's.
Well, you
good.
don't mean that there's exaggeration in the Bible, do you?
Just plausibility issues.
It reminds me that when we think about David and Goliath, about the two people, it's almost as if the only two people on the whole stage of the war, of the conflict, was
Yeah.
the two of them, when really that's, I'm just thinking about my mental image that I've always had was quite sparse with,
Right,
Saul trying to give him the armor or something, but
right.
it seems almost like, all the world's a stage and these two characters are on it,
Right.
and
Mhm.
who knows what it was really like, but
Yeah.
this thing about not killing Saul in the cave has
Mhm.
always been just really a poignant part for me, because he loved David, and David loved Saul, and there were, the stars were crossed so that they didn't really get to have the relationship that might have happened.
Oh,
Does
even-
anybody know what an ephod is?
Yeah, it's part of, I just looked it up as you
Oh,
were
yeah,
reading.
I think
I
I
had
looked
no
it up in
idea.
this.
It's part of a ceremonial dress for a priest.
Ah,
Yeah. You remember
Um,
when Samuel was a little boy and she left him at the temple, and
mhm.
so every year his mother would come with
Yes.
a little ephod that she would make for him,
Ah,
and it's sort of like a deacon's kind of tunic or sort
Yeah,
of.
it's like something that goes over the linen gown.
mhm.
Something that goes
Yeah.
over the ordinary dress that a man would wear. But what about this village he slaughters? He slaughters a whole village of priests. I mean, seems a
Well, he
little
was
brutal.
the Edomite was a